Good morning, everybody. It's good to see you. It's so good to be here this morning. I'm Vanessa Southern. It's funny, I had to look down for that, but I actually know who I am. I'm Vanessa Southern. I'm the senior minister of the First Unitarian Universalist Society of San Francisco, and I want to thank Sam King for being with me, one of our worship associates. Daniel Jackoway is going to be doing our reflection remotely today, so he'll be with us too. If you are joining us for the first time, or one of the first times, I would just encourage you to look for and download the order of service, which looks something like this, and so you can follow along in worship with us this morning. And of course, feel free to join in the coffee hour, the Zoom coffee hour, if you're remote, or just join us in the courtyard after service for some time of fellowship. And thanks to all the lay leaders and all of the staff and our singers and everybody who is making this Sunday possible from all the places and ways in which we are making it possible this morning. We are marking and we are holding a lot this morning. Tomorrow is Indigenous Peoples Day, which is an official holiday here in San Francisco and increasingly around the country. After decades of organizing by Native Americans and other folks who are partnering in that effort. It's a day that we make some time to recognize the legacies of colonialism and the lasting consequences to Indigenous communities and the past and present and future of Indigenous peoples in the United States, of strength and resilience, and vivid and abundant life too. Today, we're going to be weaving in and out of the question, an open and somewhat leading question of not what is earth to us, but who is the earth to us. And the sermon and the service are drawn in part largely out of the words and stories and reflections of an amazing writer and thinker, Robin Wall Kimmerer, and drawn from her book, Braiding Sweetgrass, but also an interview she did with Krista Tippett in 2015. So I'm super excited to delve into her thinking. We're going to pause too, particularly this morning, to recognize, as you might expect, that this religious community and this city that we're in rests on the ancestral territory of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples. So we pause in the difficult truth that we reside on this land not by accident, by the systematic and concrete acts of the dispossession of a peoples from their lands. We make this acknowledgement as one act, one concrete act of acknowledgement and repair. Another piece of that acknowledgement and repair is actually going to be in our offering this morning, so I wanted to just give you a heads up about it. We're going to be taking our offering this morning for the Sogorate Land Trust, which, if you don't already know about it, is this amazing organization. It's an urban, indigenous, women-led land trust based in the San Francisco Bay Area. It is an organization that is focused on three things: the rematriation of land, so acquiring land back for the Ohlone people, the restoration of lands, and the revitalization of Ohlone culture. They're inviting folks to do things like give a voluntary land tax on a percentage of your rent or home value. It's an amazing effort to make this restoration and reparation possible. My husband and I offered our response to that request last year, as was asked, and it's just a chance to actually take seriously what our faith asks us to do in the work of restoring justice and healing, and to do so literally responding to what the Ohlone people are asking of us through the work of the Sogorate Land Trust. So the offering today will be given and gratefully received, and I will report back next week what we are making possible today. So thank you all in advance for your part in that. Wonderful. I'd like now to invite us to enter into music and the places it takes us. Our opening hymn is hymn number 207, Earth Was Given as a Garden. In these times, we are asking people in the sanctuary to hum, although there are so few of us, you probably could sing quietly through your masks, vaccinated as we are. So let's enter into the spirit of music and song together.
Now please join me in saying the words of our unison chalice lighting. The words are printed in your order of service. We light this chalice for the light of truth, the warmth of love, and the fire of commitment. We light this symbol of our faith as we gather together. Hi, I'm Sam, your worship associate for the morning, and if this is your first time joining us, then welcome. Some of you may have also heard that our Sunday school year has started back up again, and I'd like to extend a special welcome to the youth from our Neighboring Faiths class who are watching worship this morning as well, so that we can get a baseline before visiting other congregations. You can follow along in the order of service, which is available in the description of this video and is emailed to everybody who receives our newsletter, which you can get by signing up through a link to our connection form in the order of service and video description. The order of service also lists upcoming events and links to opportunities to connect, including our Zoom coffee hour, which takes place after the service. Please join in anything that interests you. I want to call your attention especially to the Pagan Interest Circle gathering later this month, singing in the end of the year over Zoom. There are also many opportunities for spiritual growth and for connection with the rest of the congregation. I believe that's all I wanted to call to your attention, so let us center ourselves now in worship by singing our meditation on breathing. The words are in your order of service, and you can listen to our song leader if this is the first time singing it, and then join in as we sing through a few times together.
We are a community bound not by a creedal statement, but by the promises that we make to one another about how we live this journey together. So in honor of that set of promises, let's say together the words of our covenant printed in our order of service. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its prayer. This is our great covenant to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in freedom, and to help one another.
Recognizing there is human suffering all over this world in the course of natural and human catastrophes, we ring our gong today in honor of 3 such places of suffering and struggle. We ring our gong first, as we have since July 2019, for those lives held and those lives lost in federal custody in our detention camps, and for the dismissal of lives at our border that contribute to mounting trauma and the long history of xenophobia, racism, and inhumanity to one another. We ring our gong 7 times for this week of days in which human dignity has been dismissed, and for our responsibility for that as citizens of this country. We ring our gong additionally once for the losses this week to COVID-19. This last week, 51,504 people died of COVID-19 globally, 11,855 in the United States alone. We hold in our hearts all of these losses, lest the numbers numb us to the human toll of the virus. And we hold with gratitude all who are working around the world to produce and distribute vaccines and all other efforts to support greater health, survival, and immunity from the virus. And the reminder that none of us will be completely safe until all are protected in this health crisis. Finally, we ring our gong once for Indigenous people on this continent and around the world, for lives taken, language and culture under threat or attack, and also for resilience, survival, and the long fight for justice and restoration. So much to remember and hold. May we keep those we have named and their loved ones in our thoughts and in our prayers, and may we ease the tide of human suffering this coming week, howsoever we can. Now I would like to bring us into a time of prayer and meditation. This day in UUSF, we are on the lands of the Ohlone people, and this day our meditation will be a poem titled Almost Midnight by Deborah A. Miranda, an enrolled member of the Ohlone Constanoan Esselen Nation of the Greater Monterey Bay Area in California. Wife and dogs have gone to bed. I sit here with the front door open. Crickets sing patiently a long lullaby in lazy harmony. Rain falls on our tin roof. Sharp taps of reality start and stop. I breathe myself back in to my body. Come back, self. You've been out fighting demons and bullies and liars. You've been talking to an electronic box with no ears. You've been cheering for a democracy that doesn't exist. We're all walking on bones. Some of us are walking on more bones than others, Breathe. Back into the body, little one. The human world is broken, but so beautifully. Corruption of the soul never shows scars. When you don't resist, no wounds exist. Breathe. Breathe it back. In this world, we live in bodies of flesh. In this world, our souls tether themselves with blood. This is a good thing. Otherwise, we might take wing into darkness. Never touch our mother, twist language into silvery shapes. Breathe now. Let the crickets tell you their truth. Let it be yours for now. And now, making space and time to breathe back into ourselves, let us enter into a time of shared and sacred silence. Whatever truth or connection you found in these moments, let it be yours for now.
I grew up in northern Delaware, a few miles from President Biden's house. If you know what the suburbs far outside of New York or Washington, D.C. look like, that's the general idea. Classic 4 seasons, pretty rainy. In the summer, the landscape is very, very green compared to California. I spent much of my summers in that nature and humidity. I played tennis, went to day camp at state parks, and mountain biked. Every year, about 10 families from my Unitarian Universalist church would take a long weekend camping together in the Poconos Mountains north of Philadelphia. We would enjoy nature and the power of water in all of its forms. We swam in the lake, went whitewater rafting down a nearby river, and inevitably, we would experience pouring rain at least one evening of the trip. We would huddle under tarps and canopies, playing card games, and run to the bathhouse when a moment of lighter rain came. One of my earliest childhood memories is when I was 4, waking up in the middle of the night to a flooded tent. We were one of the last families to arrive, and so we had last pick of campsites, and it turned out that if it rained hard enough, water would drain right through our tent. And I have many fond memories of enjoying an unusual degree of freedom for my age, those weekends in the wooded mountains. All of the kids would travel in a pack, with the older kids adding some degree of responsibility to the mix. And we could wander down to the lake without our parents, swimming under the watch of lifeguards, and playing frisbee on the beach after it closed. In a decade living with the Bay Area's lack of significant seasonal change, I really didn't miss the East Coast. I was happy to trade the novelty of a new season for easy access to both hills and ocean, and I appreciate being able to walk or take the bus wherever I go without having to deal with weather worse than the occasional rainstorm. But when the pandemic hit last year, the lure of the East Coast slowly grew. Originally, we had the thought that my partner and I should move across town to afford a bigger place than the 1-bedroom apartment that we were now spending all of our time in. Then we had the passing fancy of what if we moved back to Delaware. But we dismissed it. Until we came back around and ended up making it happen, moving back into those same woods where I grew up. And it was lovely. We lived in Delaware through every season, starting with the humidity of the end of last summer, through the yellows and oranges of fall, followed by the chill and occasional snow of mid-Atlantic winter, and then the glory of spring. We relearned how warm 50 degrees and sunny can feel when it's early March. I don't think of myself as someone with a deep spiritual connection to nature. And I feel very at home in San Francisco after my decade here. But there was something very comforting about being back in those woods, re-immersed in the climate and landscape where I lived my first 18 years. In such an uncertain time, the feel of the rhythm of the seasons was comforting and familiar. And when the world around me was so dynamic, the feel of the air changing, the color of the leaves progressing, the snow slowly melting, the plants re-emerging in spring, it encouraged me to be mindful as I took my dog out for walks. there was always something new to notice. Now, I am back in San Francisco, experiencing my first California autumn since 2019. And I am once again appreciating the novelty and the feel of this season in my new home. I never used to think of autumn being a season in San Francisco, but the abrupt shift from Monday's heat to Tuesday's cool weather felt autumnal. And once again, the novelty is prompting me to be mindful of the little details of how the air feels and how the sunlight looks. As I rebuild my San Francisco habits in this new and uncertain world, I am once again finding comfort and an increased feeling of settling in as I ride the waves of the seasons.
Our offering today will go to the Socorro Te Land Trust. As Vanessa mentioned, they're an urban, indigenous, women-led land trust that facilitates the return of indigenous land to indigenous people. To make a donation online, please use the special offering tab to make your gift. If you're sending a check, please mark in the memo special offering and today's date, October 10th, 2021. If you're in the sanctuary, on your way out, you can drop money in the baskets at the back. We'll let folks know next week how much we were able to raise. The offering will now be given and gratefully received.
Wild waves of stone, the wonder of a wind and crashing sea, nature in power.
Our reading this morning is taken from Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teaching of Plants by Wall Kimmerer. Wall Kimmerer is a botanist, and she's a member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation. She's a professor of environmental biology at the State University of New York of Environmental Science and Forestry, and she is the founding director of the Center for Native Peoples and the Environment. Our reading this morning is the beginning of the story of Sky Woman Falling. And the author does give a credit to the fact that this story, as she tells it, was adapted from the oral tradition and also from a version told by Joanne Shenandoah and Douglas George in their 1988 book on Sky Woman and Legends of the Iroquois. In the beginning, there was the sky world. She fell like a maple seed pirouetting on an autumn breeze, Sky Woman. A column of light streamed from a hole in the sky world, marking her path where only darkness had been before. It took her a long time to fall. In fear, or maybe in hope, she clutched a bundle tightly in her hand. Hurtling downward, she saw only dark water below. But in that emptiness, there were many eyes gazing up at the sudden shaft of light. They saw there a small object, a mere dust mote in the beam. As it grew closer, they could see that it was a woman, arms outstretched, long black hair billowing behind as she spiraled toward them. The geese nodded at one another and rose together from the water in a wave of goose music. She felt the beat of their wings as they flew beneath her to break her fall, far from the only home she'd ever known. She caught her breath at the warm embrace of soft feathers as they gently carried her downward. And so it began.
We
I just realized we never lit the candle in honor of all of you who are not in these walls, but bringing your spirit here. So we do that now. Well, we left Sky Woman. She was being caught on the wings of geese, far from the sky world, the only home she'd ever known, her hand clutching a bundle of we know not yet what. But even the start of her journey is far from over, it turns out. These geese could not hold her for long, the story goes. So we return to the telling. So they called a council to decide what to do. Resting on their wings, she saw them all gather, loons and otters and swans and beavers and fish of all kinds. The great turtle, a great turtle, floated in their midst and offered his back for her to rest upon. The others understood that she needed land for her home and discussed how they might serve her need. The deep divers among them had heard of mud at the bottom of the waters and agreed to go find some. Loon dove first, but the distance was too far, and after a while he surfaced with nothing to show for his efforts. One by one, the other animals offered to help: otter, beaver, sturgeon. But the depths, the darkness, and the pressures were too great for even the strongest of swimmers. They returned, gasping for air, their heads ringing. Some did not return at all. Soon, only little Muskrat was left, the weakest diver of all. He volunteered to go while the others looked on doubtfully. His small legs flailed as he worked his way downward, and he was gone a very, very long time. They waited and waited for him to return, fearing the worst for their relative, and before long, a stream of bubbles rose with the small, limp body of Muskrat. He had given his life to aid this helpless human. But then the others noticed that in his paw was tightly clenched, and when they opened it, that there was a small handful of mud. Turtle said, "Here, put it on my back. I'll hold it." Sky Woman bent and spread the mud with her hands across the shell of the turtle. Moved by the extraordinary gifts of the animals, she sang in thanksgiving and then began to dance, her feet caressing the earth. The land grew and grew as she danced her thanks. From the daub of mud on the turtle's back, all of the animal's gifts coupled with her gratitude, together they formed what we now know as Turtle Island, our home. Like any good guest, Sky Woman had not come empty-handed. The bundle was still clutched in her hand. When she toppled from the hole in the sky world, she had reached out to grab the tree of life that grew there. In her grasp were branches, fruits, and seeds of all kinds of plants. And then she scattered them onto the new ground and carefully tended to each one until the world turned from brown to green. Sunlight streamed through the hole from the sky world, allowing the seeds to flourish. Wild grasses, flowers, trees, and medicines to spread everywhere. And now that the animals, too, had plenty to eat, many came to live with her on Turtle Island. This is the story of creation, of this world, at least, as Robin Wall Kimmerer came to know and repeat it. And actually, it isn't clear to me if she knew the story as a child or found her way to its truths later, at least this telling of it. But it is clear from listening to her that she knew many of the truths it would teach in her growing up and wandering of the forests and the natural landscape of New York State as a child, where she fell in love with who and what she found there. Botany was and still is her passion. She went on to study it in college and graduate school, but what she encountered in the hallowed halls of academia was such a different relationship to the natural world. Plants were reduced to object, Kimmerer told Krista Tippett in 2015. What was important in academic study was the mechanisms by which things worked, not what their gifts or their capacities were, she would say. They were objects, she said, whereas I thought of them as subjects. And the shift in that worldview was a big hurdle for me entering into the field of science. And it wasn't just science as a discipline that brought with it this different relationship to nature than the one she'd come to know and inhabit. English made objectification too easy. In the English language, she says, if we want to speak of that sugar maple or that salamander, the grammar that we have to do so is to call those beings an it. And if I called my grandmother or the person sitting across the room from me an it, that would be so rude, right? And we wouldn't tolerate that for members of our own species, but we not only tolerate it, it's the only way we have in English to speak of other beings as an it. In Potawatomi, the cases that we have are animate and inanimate. And it's impossible in our language to speak of other living beings as its. And we think of water as alive, of rocks as alive, alive in different ways, but certainly not inanimate. Generally, the inanimate grammar is reserved for those things we human beings have created, by which she means things like pulpits, or candles, or trucks. All else has life in it and asks for relationship. Science is afraid, she says, of humans anthropomorphizing nature, but there is something other than seeing something as human that still allows for us to see the personhood of nature or animals, plants. Something, she says, is about acknowledging that these forms have consciousness, have awareness, have beingness. In fact, she says, science is showing that plants have the capacity to learn and have memory. We're at the edge of this wonderful revolution in really understanding the sentience of other beings. And the value of all this learning, what we're all hearing about how plants communicate with each other, how trees warn each other underground of predation, of how they share resources. It isn't just to respect the capabilities of plants more, for instance. The subjecthood of the natural world can also invite us to see ourselves and the mix of life together differently, right? Kimmerer, for instance, admits to having photosynthesis envy. envy for, as she explains, the ability to take these non-living elements of the world, air and light and water, and turn them into food that can be shared with the whole rest of the world, to turn them into medicine that is medicine for people and for trees and for soil. And we cannot even approach the kind of creativity that they have. Science, she points out, asks us to learn about organisms. Traditional knowledge asks us to learn from them. In the story of Sky Woman, the animals were older than the first human who arrived helpless, remember? They were her teachers. And Zimmerer would say they still are. For instance, Zimmerer is an expert on mosses. She's written a book about them. It's actually one that inspired the novel The Signature of All Things that Elizabeth Gilbert wrote about a botanist. And Zimmerer asks for this kind of attentiveness and relationship, and she shows the way to it in the way that she talks about the gifts and the teaching of mosses. She writes, "An example of what I mean by this is their simplicity, in the power of being small. Mosses become so successful all over the world because they live in these tiny layers on rocks, on logs, and on trees. They work with the natural forces that lie over every surface of the world, and to me they are exemplars not only of surviving, but of flourishing by working with natural processes. Mosses are superb teachers about living within your means. But even more than that, they don't grab resources efficiently. They give more than they get," she writes. Mosses build soil. They purify water. They make homes for this myriad of all these cool little invertebrates that live there. They are just engines of biodiversity. They do all of these things, and yet they're only a centimeter tall. The mosses challenge us, if we let them, to reconsider our role in the web of life. If we let them. I remember a friend once talking about when she got glasses for the first time. She was a small child, and when she put them on, she was standing outside in her front yard, and she was flabbergasted. The trees, they had all these wild, finely shaped green things on them. She realized she'd always heard about leaves, but never understood what people were talking about, not really when they used that word, not until life burst into focus with that new set of eyes. Reading Robin Wall Kimmerer feels a bit like that for me, about seeing the world through her eyes, this world that comes into a new kind of focus with new texture and understanding and appreciation. All the different relationships that are part of this way of being in and in relationship to the world, and the power of it. Zimmer alludes to the ways that this way of seeing and being in relationship is reinforced in her life by a whole lot of cultural practices and norms, including, not insignificantly, of course, the foundational story of Sky Woman falling and how the world began. Nature as a thing, no, not as a thing to be used up. Nature not as a thing to be judged simply by what it has done for us lately, or the joy it's even given us, or the price we can put on it. Nature as this whole world that pre-existed, that caught us, that gave their lives to make a place for us, that were our first teachers, our first family, our forever family. As this place that Sky Woman brought her gifts, and with muskrat's sacrificial mud and on the back of the turtle struggling to hold her because she needed a place to stand. Together they danced with sun and mud and creative commitment into making a world where they could all find a better life together. And I think about that in comparison to some of the foundational stories that live and haunt in the corners of our own culture. Our first hymn this morning, I invite you, if you weren't sort of aware of the words in this way, to go back and read them. It's this attempt to rework the creation story that's in Genesis. And whether we are Jewish in background or Christian in background or Muslim in background or not, that story still lives and breathes and haunts our culture and its ethics, right? And another version of the story, other than the hymn lyricist trying so valiantly, as so many of us are, to recast even that story so it lives differently in our consciousness and invites us differently into the world. It can also be, and I think has also been read as this story of the creation of a perfect garden out of which we are cast out into the current imperfect world, which when we are cast out is marked by suffering and hardship in a chain of events initiated by the snake, the danger and betrayal, the bite of an apple, a world that is dangerous and to be distrusted, all the implications of that story when it lives in the recesses of our brain, in the history of our puritanical culture, right? Because I think when we pay attention to stories, we have to realize no story that we tell is without moral content or implications. I was even thinking, in reflecting on this, how the way we tell the story of evolution has a subjecthood and a choice about where the emphasis gets told, right? So those who think that they're telling an objective scientific story, which I have incredible respect for, also need to listen for the way we tell that story, right? Is it about competition and survival of the fittest? That is a piece of it. Is it about nature with its amazing ability to adapt and mutate infinitely? Does that get us off the hook for breaking our own destructive habits? Our stories and the way we tell them, it's clear, are not saving us. It's clear not just our habits and our laws, but maybe our stories need some challenging and some creative changing in the way we tell them. We may need to actually uproot some of them, the ways they've been planted in us, be more aware of that, find maybe some new eyes for seeing and telling them so that we can see maybe what is actually more of the real texture of our place and relationship with the world. Bring it into focus. And most of us, those of us who are not from communities who own the story of Sky Woman falling as their own, we can't just take that story. We have to find ways to tell versions of our own. The ones that speak with love and respect and mutuality about our place and the order of things. No, not things. The order of persons, of life. And then piece it together ourselves as this sort of religious venture, salvific venture that we are engaged in, need to be engaged in. Well, may the ways in which we do that, or maybe the ways in which we're already doing that, be blessed and bring this story of life and relationship to life and personhood and relationship to the personhood of plants and animals and landscapes. May they be stories that are grounded in connection and reciprocity. The way Daniel's is of the woods, if you listen to his reflection today, the woods that catch and hold him through the uncertainty and upheaval of pandemic. That then calls him and all of us to hold them too. So, blessings to us in this restorative, life-giving journey. In that spirit, we will sing our closing hymn. It's in the Teal hymnal, Blue Boat Home. It has the same tune as our opening hymn, doesn't it? Yes. So you should be well familiar with it. So hum or sing softly but soulfully as we close our worship and song.
Still my island heart can sing.
And now may the light of love shine upon us. Out from within us, be gracious unto us and grant us peace. For this is the day we are given. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Amen.